Hey everybody, thank you for listening to this week's Rantburgers. I'm Jay. Somewhere around here is my occasional co-star Angel, but she won't show up on camera on time because she's a cat. Um, Today I'm just gonna bomb through a kind of a look at the news and current events. Don't have much else to say. Um, Most of what I'm going to talk about you can get in better detail. You can get in better detail from Scott Horton at scotthortonshow.com. Just search Scott Horton Show. But I wanted to kind of summarize it because it's important. Right now, it's been a bad week for airplanes. It's been a real bad week for airplanes. Last week, Malaysian Airlines MH17 was shot down over the Ukraine. And then an Algeria Air flight went down in Mali, and a Trans-Asia airplane went down in Taiwan. It's just been a hard luck week for airplanes. None of these things seems to be connected, and there are people who draw false connections or tenuous connections and then treat that as evidence of a conspiracy. I'm going to need some more evidence than that. Even in the case of MH17 and MH370, there are a few coincidences. There were people who lost people on both planes. There was one guy who escaped both flights, probably the luckiest man of this decade. But I don't see anything that actually connects the two, and that's mainly because we have no idea what happened to MH370. It just disappeared off the face of the earth. It was off course and went into the ocean somewhere, and we're going to be lucky if we ever find out what happened to it, because there's a lot of ocean out there, and it's a very deep place to look for an airplane, and the search costs money. And so one of my guilty pleasures is a TV show called Air Crash Investigation. Air Crash Investigation goes through the crash and the investigation of various air disasters, and I just kind of dig it. But you learn some things that may not make you all that comfortable about flying. You also learn how really coincidental and chaotic some of this stuff is. The most credible thing I heard about MH370 was a pilot speculating that there might have been a fire on board. With a fire on board, the pilot might try to turn to get to a nearby airport. If the fire were inside the bulkhead, it might cut electrical systems, leading to a loss of communication. And then the people on board might be overcome by smoke. And so what you might see is the plane turning seemingly in a random direction, communication dying, and then the plane flying off towards its doom, which is pretty much what we saw from the radar track of MH370. So that fits all the available facts right now. Again, you got to be careful with what you accept as an available fact. Be careful, because my experience is, sadly, a lot of conspiracy people will make stuff up, or they will seize on rumors that other people have made up and not try to track them down. For instance, there was a rumor that cell phones were pinging and contacting the cell towers and satellites for hours after the plane disappeared. But you track that back down, and it wasn't really happening. It was a rumor started by somebody somewhere. There's lots of rumors about MH17 too. It looks probable right now. Again, Scott Horton covers this in much better detail. Over in Ukraine, you have an east-west, you might call it a civil war, but it's not actually. It's a war of secession. The east of Ukraine is Russian-flavored. They want to go with Russia. The west is Western-flavored, and they want to go with West Germany. Oh, here's my other co-star, Sophie the cat. Hello, Sophie. So the Ukrainians and their cats. I don't think their cats give a damn. They just wish things would stop exploding and people would pet them and feed them more. If I understand Ukrainian cat logic. But you have East Ukraine, which is Russia flavored, and West Ukraine, which is West flavored. Again, listening to Scott Horton, the Western Ukrainians scored a coup earlier this year where there was actually a violent push and the elected Ukrainian government was displaced in favor of a Western-leaning government, including some neo-Nazis. That's what sparked the people in eastern Ukraine to throw up their middle fingers and say, we don't want to play this anymore, we're leaving. And since the since the tax farmers hate to let their tax cattle go, that starts a civil war. It starts a war of Western aggression against the Eastern secessionists. The thing is, there's accusations that the Russians are arming and backing the Eastern Ukrainian Russian-flavored separatists. Well, of course they are. They're Russian people. But all three sides, the Russians, the Western Ukrainians, and the Eastern Ukrainians, are using Russian-built weapons. So, the fact that MH17 was blown up by a BUK anti-aircraft missile doesn't tell us anything, because all three sides could have been using it. Okay, it looks more likely right now that it was the Eastern Ukrainian rebels who shot down the jet. They've been shooting down Ukrainian aircraft all for a month prior. They were really clearing the skies out. It was a known conflict zone and pilots were warned to go around, but apparently there was a storm and MH17 deviated into the conflict zone to avoid the storm. Not the best decision I ever heard of, but the pilot may have thought that his altitude and speed would keep him out of the conflict on the ground. But there's also talk that Russian President Vladimir Putin's plane was going to be somewhere in that area, somewhere at that altitude, in a similar direction at that time. And so, there's no way of knowing, and it appears that the Ukrainian rebels have interfered with the evidence on the ground. So we will never know exactly. I don't think we will. And boy, I would not want to be a stockholder in Malaysia Airlines. Give it about 3 months, I think you'll be able to pick that shit up on the, that stuff up on the penny stock exchanges, because they're having a bad time. The other two air crashes we're talking about is the Algeria Air. It's 5017. Apparently the plane went down in Mali, and I saw one news report where the pilot was requesting permission to change course to avoid weather. Now that brings up an interesting point. If he was calling to request a change of course to avoid weather, that means he was encountering weather he felt was a danger to his vehicle, but didn't feel authorized to make a course adjustment himself to avoid it and take steps to ensure the safety of his vehicle. He felt like he had to call the tower and get clearance for a course change. And we may find later on that they kind of dilly-dallied and didn't take the request seriously until the plane disappeared. I've seen this in this air crash disaster show. It's strange. Humans, we love our hierarchies. We love our hierarchies so much, we will stick with them through the gates of insanity or death. There are at least 2 episodes of air crash disasters where people flew their plane into the ground rather than question their hierarchy, or they allowed themselves to be flown into the ground rather than question their hierarchy. They stayed true to their chain of command right into the ground. And you see it in war too, especially World War I. The troops had discipline so that when the sergeant said, "Over the top, boys," knowing that it was effectively suicide, they climbed up on top of their trench and ran at machine guns. And this happened on both sides. The fact that people creatures will do this is scary to me. And as civilians, supposedly the people who have democratic control, supposedly the people who have democratic control, we kind of owe it to people not to let them get used up like that. And history shows that actually we civilians back behind the lines have effectively no way to stop it. Hopefully we can avoid U.S. military involvement in this Ukraine mess by telling Obama, hell no, we won't go. That would be lovely. But the other airplane that went down was a Trans-Asia Air flight. I was just reading before I started this recording that 7 other airplanes made the same approach that the Trans-Asia airplane did. So that one looks like a pilot error, and that is also regrettably common. So there's no reason to suspect that any of these recent 3 air crashes are connected, and I don't see any reason to expect that the Malaysian air crashes are related, except possibly malfeasance in the upper offices. Not necessarily malfeasance, perhaps more incompetence in the Malaysia Air offices. No Western airline would have been flying into a conflict zone. They'd have routed around it. And we may never know if there was a fire aboard MH370 and if that fire was due to cutting corners on maintenance. We'll never know. We don't know. Put a big question mark next to that one, but usually if a plane bursts into flame, there's a reason. That is kind of not something we want airplanes to do, so there you go. Now, another place where the United States is threatening to get involved militarily, probably already is involved militarily, is in the nation formerly known as Iraq. The geographical area formerly known as Iraq. I summarized this for a friend of mine last week, and it took me an hour and 10 minutes. Okay? But again, all this is covered in much better detail in Scott Horton. The long and short of it is, Iraq was Frankenstein together out of several factions, and Syria was Frankenstein together out of several factions. There's a Sunni, a Shia, and a Kurd faction in both countries. The uprising that started in 2011 and has continued ever since in Syria was an Islamist Sunni uprising. But when you say Islamist and Sunni, you have to be careful because those two are not the same thing. Also, the flavor of Islamist. There's the Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden style of Islamist, who are a pack of nut jobs. But that is also fluid and evolving over time. In Syria, the Islamists kind of had a big filter for crazy going on. Sane people don't do well in revolutions. Sane people tend to get caught early, they tend to go to jail, or they tend to hunker down and wait it out. It's the crazy people who run around killing soldiers and scoring military victories during revolutions. And this happened in Syria, and so the United States kept making mouth noises about supporting a moderate Syrian rebels, but there weren't any, because all of the moderates were back in the hotels, taking international grants and drinking booze. And then what they'd do is they'd buy a bunch of weapons and claim it was for the moderate Syrian rebels, and then turn around and hand it all to the crazies, the Northern Storm Brigade, ISIS. Now, the reason ISIS got so much ground in Iraq is because they were going the same way the Sunni locals were going. So what happened is they'd roll into a town, and it would be like in Civ or in Risk. You put your icon on top of the city, and now the city changes color and it's yours. Well, those people were kind of waiting to throw up the ISIS flag and change color and go with them. So these maybe 8,000 guys playing murder hobos in Toyota Hilux pickup trucks with machine guns mounted on them, except for helicopters. Those Toyota Hiluxes are going to, and other wheeled, automobiles are going to have fierce mobility out there in the flat desert, which means these crazy people will be able to turn up almost anywhere, shoot the hell out of the place, and then be gone and off to their next raid. So you're dealing with a highly mobile force that's running around just doing, Middle Eastern drive-bys and everything. The Iraqi army that had been set up in the wake of the U.S. invasion was basically an Amway scam. So it collapsed right away because it wasn't there to fight. It was there to scam for money. And as soon as actual fighting showed up, all the Amway salesmen threw off their uniforms and ran away. They said nope. And so, but the Shia in Shiistan along the Fertile Crescent, those guys are committed. They're serious about defending their territory, so the fighting gets a lot harder when you get into Shiistan, which is why they're kind of forming a border at that point. Because on one side, the Islamic State crazies have support from the Sunni militias, and on the other side, they are opposed by the Shia militias. Okay, the same deal up in now Kurdistan. Now, I thought that Turkey was not going to tolerate Kurdistan. Back in 2009 and 2010, Turkey was flying bombing raids into northern Iraq, saying, "You will not Kurdistan." Well, it seems like somebody there grew a brain and said, hey, if they get Kirkuk, they're going to have oil, and they're going to have to ship that oil out somewhere, and we can get a taste of that. And suddenly, the Turks are much more tolerant of Kurdistan. Strange how the money kind of has something to say about that. So, Kurdistan has been long in the pockets of the West and the Mossad. So, CIA and U.S. military and Mossad come and go as they please. It's basically an open ground for them now. And now it's being much more official. I was listening to Scott Horton interview Mitchell Prothero, and apparently the guy drove around Kurdistan for a while until his Syrian taxi driver. Now there's a tough guy. There's a guy whose job I do not want. A Syrian taxi driver in Kurdistan. But he said, "Oh, you want to go to the CIA base," and drove him right to it. So all the Kurds and folks in that area know. Apparently, they're building up bases in Kurdistan where they're going to put drones, helicopters, and special forces guys. And we haven't heard anything. So that may mean that operations have already begun. There's some talk of drones being sighted, but there's no talk, there have been no reports of missiles fired from drones yet. But this Islamic State has chopped off the western part of Iraq, and they've the western and northern corner of Iraq up there near the Turkey-Syria border. They've also chopped off a good chunk of Syria, and now they've stitched the Syrian Sunnis and the Iraqi Sunnis together in the Islamic State, an al-Qaeda-flavored state, which several factions in the area cannot take, including the United States. They cannot have an al-Qaeda-flavored state come up in that region, even though they did everything to pave the way for it, almost as though they were planning for it and encouraging it, but now they're panicking because they cannot have it. Apparently, what's left of the Syrian rebels, or the moderate Syrian rebels, the ones I just said didn't exist. They do sort of exist, but they were never fighting as hard as the crazies. But now they're down along the Jordanian border, the Jordanian-Syrian border, holding that because nobody's coming across there. The Jordanian army is out, and Israel has said that if the Islamic State crosses that border into Jordan, they will be facing the IDF. The IDF will roll in on them and fight them in Jordan rather than fighting them on the other side of Jordan, which is, a drive. That's just insanity waiting to happen, and I don't think the Islamic State is going to try it. I do think they're going to roll back into Syria and try to take a couple more cities and try to buttress themselves as the Islamic State. Uh, al-Baghdadi, the current self-proclaimed caliph. Now, caliph is like the Pope of Islam, and so he jumps up and yells, "I'm the caliph." There are a billion Muslims in the world, a lot of them in Indonesia and in faraway places. So I'm sure they're kind of looking over their glasses at al-Baghdadi, going, "Oh, really?" But that's a good move on his part. He's playing good chess, because if the U.S. moves to stomp him, then he can claim, hey, this is part of the West's war against Islam. They won't let us have a caliph. Somebody steps up and says, I'm the caliph. Now, if the U.S. leaves pressure alone and just contains him for a while, I'll bet Baghdadi is going to talk somebody into sticking a knife in his back. I'll bet you if he doesn't face serious U.S. opposition in the next 6 months, he's going to talk one of his local allies into doing him in, because he being awful badge heavy. There has been discussion of the Islamic State enforcing genital mutilation of women. But there's also, I read on the BBC a report saying, wait, that's a little questionable. And it was one report on social media. And the one thing you got to know about social media is people say stuff. Never believe anything people say on social media unless you get a second source, unless you can verify it. I mean, that's just all there is to it. You cannot trust anything that comes across the Facebook or the Twitter unless you go look for confirmation elsewhere. So I don't know. I don't think they're going to undertake a huge program of female genital mutilation at this point, simply because they're in the middle of fighting a war. They were trying to take Baghdad, and they were trying to take Kirkuk. They're trying to take Aleppo in Syria. So they have their, there's no end of places for them to drive their Toyota Hiluxes and shoot the crap out of. Okay, and there's all kinds of people fisting up to come back at them. So, stopping to cause a huge social problem. That's what got Iraq in Al-Qaeda in Iraq the first time. They went in and started acting like thugs, and eventually the local Sunni militias killed them or drove them off because they were too badge heavy. They were just much too authoritarian. And the local guys just said, no, not me, buddy. Not my daughter, not my son. Get out. So I think al-Baghdadi is a little smarter than to start chopping bits of people off at random in a place he claims as his state, to avoid antagonizing them and turning them into a piece of the resistance against him. But I think he's playing a very risky game. On the other hand, he's a guy who drives around in a Toyota Hilux with a machine gun doing drive-bys on Shia and Kurds and all the other different factions over there in Syria. So high-risk games are what he does. Fox News. I haven't read a lot about Fox News, but Fox News is driving the Ukraine and this Middle Eastern situation insane. And they are coming across as Nazi TV. I mean, Joseph Goebbels is saying, no, too much, ratchet it back. Because, they're beating the war drums. They're treating like the U.S. has 14 armies to send to all spots in the world, where the U.S. barely has one right now because we broke it in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so their opinion of what American force could do and what American force should do is highly optimistic. But painting everything as white hats and black hats gets everybody lined up into that social hierarchy that we love, right? If America's at war against the bad guys, well, then we all go get and stand in line and get the stripes in our sleeves so we know where we stand relative to each other and we know what we're doing, and then we're happy little campers because all the uncertainty is removed from our lives. And that's really the value of fascism, of tyranny. If you live in a tyranny, you know precisely where you stand. You know precisely what's expected of you. And that's why some people dig it. Isn't that sad? Some people thrive on being incarcerated or being in the military because they like having a very well-defined structure and very well-defined expectations of what they're supposed to do. Out in the free world, where it's the market, you have to make people offer. You have to say, hey, I will do for you. In my case, I will drive you to a place for some money. And you run the risk of rejection, and that rejection can be hard to take, especially if you run into a string of them. So I understand people not wanting to mess with that. But the fact of the matter is, uh, that uncertain market of life, that's life. That's where we go. That's how we do it. And so, uh, I would feel much better even if I were going broke in a free market than knowing, my official rank in the totalitarian hierarchy. But that's because I'm a cranky libertarian, and I've never handled hierarchy or social order that well. I really hope that this isn't a genetic thing. I really hope that it's not a permanent minority of us battling against a overwhelming evolutionary force towards conformity. Because if it is, then we're screwed. Things won't change until humanity changes. I'm hoping this is cultural, and I'm hoping that we can bring people away from that need for certainty into enjoying when you are successful and when you get paid. Because let me tell you something, providing a service that you like and getting paid for it is fun. It feels good. When somebody puts cash in your hands for doing something for them, oh, it's a lovely feeling. And sometimes I consider going and getting a real job that's more regimented and less free-form than taxi driving. But then I remember, at the end of the day, I get paid. I have money in hand, right? And I meet people, and I have the relationship right there, and I know if it succeeds right there, and I do it one at a time. It's a serial job, but, and I really kind of enjoy that element of being in the market, okay? There's more blah, blah, blah about Uber and Lyft and everything, and what it is people who have been both captured by the regulations and attempting to capture the regulators are whining and crying that Uber and Lyft don't have the same rules as they are. My preference would be, let's lower the rules until we're all at the level of Uber and Lyft, and then you will see quite a great deal. You'll see a range, because you'll see crappy, scary, shady cabs for really cheap. Oh, and here's my co-star. Hello, Angel. And then you'll see Uber Continental Town Car for the upscale customers, and everybody will get their cab. That would be really good. Isn't it, wouldn't it, Angel? Say hello to the free market, kitty. Yes. Okay, all right. She's right, we've blathered on enough, and now it's time to enter the free market of cat pets. So thank you very much for listening. Have a good afternoon, and we'll talk to you next week.